A year later, the question is, do I regret going back to a 9-to-5? Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Brooke Roberts. In this episode, I want to dive into what I've learned or thought about the process of going back to a full-time role after being an entrepreneur, especially for such a long time. Some of the thoughts and struggles and challenges and pros and cons of that decision a year later of what I've kind of discovered. For those of you who need a little refresher, back in December of 2021, I was offered the job of Director of International Education, which is an industry I have worked in my entire career. So it wasn't out of left field that I went for this role. And that was a very traditional job in a lot of ways, where I had to commute, which means I had to buy a car. For those of you who've been around for a long time, I've been car free for a very long time. And so I had to buy a car. I had to commute in every single day, Monday through Friday, work, 8 to 5 basically, and in an office with employees. Yeah, it was just very, very traditional in all of those ways. But the little plot twist in all of that is around July, I was actually headhunted by another company who offered me a director of marketing job at a educational tech startup, ed tech startup. They made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and so I accepted. So within the span of a year, I applied for one job, got the job, started the job. 8 months later, left that job to start a new job. So in August of 2022, is that right? Yeah, August 2022, I started with my current company, and that is a fully remote job. So I work from home or work from wherever basically. So I sold my car. In less than a year, I basically bought a car, sold a car, changed jobs, the whole thing. But that is par for the course for me. My career has always been a little unpredictable, if you will. I started with that new company, and I've been in that role, since then. I'm recording this now in January 2023. So all told, I was at the college for 9 months, and I've been in this role for about 5 months. The college job, I actually stayed on sort of part-time-ish, working remotely as a sort of a contract interim director to help them as they transition to recruit and find someone to replace me. So let's get into the pros and cons. And I made a long list here of my thoughts on both the pros and the cons of being an employee again. And after having 10 years of knowing what that feels like, of sort of running my own show, versus these scenarios that I've been in very traditional sort of kind of corporate type of a role at the college, and then more of a startup environment that I'm in now. And they're very different, but they're both jobs. I get a salary, I get benefits, technically PTO, but like at the startup, we have unlimited PTO. Lots of different things about this that makes it both of these roles pretty traditional. So let's talk about the first one. Number one, being able to heal from burnout and stress. Obviously, with both these jobs, like I mentioned, I have a salary, were both really great salaries. I get healthcare benefits. I get retirement investment from the organizations. There's just a lot of like lovely things that when you go out on your own, especially if you're doing something small, solopreneur, the idea of giving yourself a regular salary, of giving yourself healthcare, of investing in your retirement, all of those things become nice to have. When I started my first company in 2013, there was no salary, there was no healthcare or retirement investing. All of that, I was like, I will catch up on all of those things later. Right now, my focus is growing this business. I thought that having that financial bandwidth that these jobs would give me, it would just give me all this like relief and emotional openness and bandwidth to then, it's give me all these entrepreneurial inspirations. So I'd basically, be side hustling and burning the midnight oil on these side projects that I didn't have to make money from because my day job paid me. I just thought, I'm just going to roll into this because this financial, security and health security would give me that bandwidth. But y'all, it turns out that 10 years working for yourself, 9 years, I'll say 9 years of being an entrepreneur, working for myself, even whether it was feast or famine, where I was making great money or I wasn't, it was emotionally and psychologically draining, both on my mind, but also just on my body. Like the amount of stress that I didn't even realize I was suffering from. After a couple months in that role, I just started being like, oh, like I had no idea how much chronic stress I had been under for most of a decade. And once I kind of had these financial sort of concerns dissipate or healthcare concerns dissipate, these are things that, like you should be concerned about these things at any time in your life. But when I started my first company, I was in my early 30s. And so I was like, I'm invincible and, nothing can get me down. But, a decade later, I am starting to think about, the next part of my life is going to have challenges that are going to be different than the last 20 years of my life. And I need to be prepared for those things. So when I was able to finally kind of take a deep breath and like relax and let my shoulders kind of just release a little bit after a decade of being under this constant stress and a little bit of like low level anxiety, just a like nervousness about all these things. I did not have this like wave of inspiration and motivation to launch all these other side hustles and entrepreneurial ventures. I needed to rest. I needed to accept, that I was doing these jobs, I could do them well. I was, an expert in my field and I could do really well in my role, and also take this time to just rest and find some relaxation, get recentered, regrouped, all the re's, and really just let myself heal after a decade of basically being frayed at the ends. And finally, my body and my mind and my spirit were able to finally go, oh, okay, we just have some bandwidth to heal. And so that was really powerful. So yeah, the last year, this time last year, I had all these big goals. I'm like, I'm going to do this, this, and this. I didn't do any of those things. I did a couple of them. We'll talk about those in a second. It wasn't the sort of wash of like motivation and energy that I thought would come from it. I needed a year, maybe I'll need longer, who knows, to really heal from that. And I'm really glad that when I didn't have that motivation to do all these other things or that inspiration to do that I actually gave myself the chance to just chill, hang out with friends, watch TV, go on long, like meaningless walks. I listened to podcasts. It was just really nice and chill. I think the lesson here for all of us is that if you don't have motivation or the energy or the inspiration, or you feel like, oh, I'm just not disciplined enough, maybe like take a step back first before you judge yourself for not doing all the things. Like maybe ask yourself, like, am I just uncertain about what I want to do and so I'm not taking action, or am I just burnt out? Am I just overly stressed? And is this a chronic situation that I need to address before I get down on myself for not being a fucking superhero? If you are in a moment where you're like, why can't I motivate myself to start that podcast or start training for the half marathon? Maybe it's just not that right time for you. Number 2, the second sort of pro of me taking on a full-time job was that it allowed me to open up and dive into therapy. Doing the work to get on the right dosage and the right kind of depression medication. And I've talked about this in the past, but I really struggle. I have clinical depression, and it's something I'm probably going to grapple with my whole life. I'm feeling incredibly better. I think taking a year to just regroup and rest was game changing for me, but also just being able to go to therapy and talk through the last 10 years, the last 40 years, or, and just being able to really dive in and lean into the therapy and get to know my therapist and find somebody that really gelled with me and that I could really connect with in my therapy sessions. All of that was just incredibly powerful, and I'm still doing all those things today, and game changing for me to be able to manage my depression and kind of, get it under my control, get it so I feel like I'm the one maneuvering it instead of it kind of controlling my entire being and how I come into the world. So that was a huge win in terms of taking a job to help me get a grasp of my depression. The third thing, obviously there's some major financial benefits. Now, I've talked in other episodes about I've had 3 or 4 different businesses over the past 10 years, and they've all had varying degrees of success, and some are quite successful, made, hundreds of thousands of dollars. But when you run a business, you don't just get like $100,000 and like, ta-da, go shopping. It's not all your money. Like, I had contractors I had to pay for. I had taxes. And so when I was able to pay myself, I also decided to invest in traveling around the world and other things in my life that brought me joy and happiness in my life that were not necessarily aggressive future planning. One of the goals I set at the beginning of the year is I was going to pay off all of my student loan debt. So I started off with a little over $100,000 in student loan debt. And obviously I went to grad school. And then when I lived abroad, basically do all these deferments. Over the years, I have like plugged away at paying that off, but I've never been aggressive about it. The first thing I was able to do is I paid over $60,000 towards my student loan debt in a year. Can we just, if you're applauding wherever you are right now, can I get some finger snaps? Because that is like an amazing accomplishment. Obviously, I didn't pay it all off, which was my goal. But about, halfway through the year, I kind of decided that, you know what, instead of paying, all this money to pay my student loans back, which I'm happy to do. It was a great investment in myself. My interest rates are so low on my student loans, which I know is unique to me because they're old. Their old loans have very low student loan interest rates. So I decided to, instead of plugging so much money into those, topping up, if you will, my retirement accounts, because there were definitely 3 or 4 years there in the last decade where I was not investing anything into my retirement. So I was able to put about $25,000 into just my retirement in that year. So now I'm kind of balancing the two to kind of plug away at that student loan debt, but also make sure that I'm kind of catching up on my retirement investments as well. So financially, I'm in like an amazingly good space now. And it's incredible how in one single year that story can completely change. It just feels really good to be like, oh wow, $60K in debt just paid. It's amazing. Moving on, number 4, in both of these roles, I was working with a team, which for me, especially because my business models were all online, I could do them wherever in the world. I never really had teams. I had contractors at different spurts throughout that decade. But for the most part, I was solo. I was doing it on my own. Now, in both of these roles, I was working with a team, which obviously has its negatives. We'll talk about that in a second. It was just really lovely to be able to collaborate and join together for a common good on different projects and initiatives in both of these roles. It gave me a lot of energy. And even as an introvert, I'm kind of surprised to say that, but it was just, there's something about that camaraderie, like we're all in this together, that I forgot that is a nice to have in a kind of a traditional work setting. And I think that another layer to this for me was that it also gave me more accountability. When it was just me making promises and deadlines to myself, if you will, I could get a little more loosey-goosey on, do I actually hit those deadlines or follow through on those things, which, I don't know, probably says a lot about my self-talk. For me, external accountability, external rules, regulations, deadlines, those my personality type responds well to those things. I'm a rule follower. Like, give me the rules and I will follow them. The past year, having that kind of accountability and support when I was hit a wall or was struggling or didn't really know what direction to go forward, I had a team to go to and get feedback from, and that's been really amazing. The next element of going back to a 9-to-5 job that's been really wonderful as a voracious learner, as a lifelong learner, I am learning so much from both of those roles, in fact. And they're both continually teaching me so much about, in my current role, about marketing strategy, new to me technologies, but also new technology, and also higher ed. If I think about my career, I've worked in higher education this entire time pretty much, whether it was inside an institution or with an auxiliary organization that works with higher ed, or, my own company was still within that industry. I know a lot about higher education and international education, but I had been out of a college or university setting for so long that a lot had changed. And I was able to sort of see how the academy, as we would call it, has evolved and grown and really kind of up-leveled in a lot of ways, but also, learning too about how it's kind of stuck in the mud in other areas, and it's not advancing as much. And so that was it's been, and it continues to be, a great re-education or, up-leveled learning about these areas of marketing, higher ed, and technology, which I love to learn new things. I'm like a weirdo who you give me a topic, and if I have an inkling of interest in it, I will deep dive that stuff. I'll spend the next hour learning everything about it. The learning is really powerful for me. The next thing, my current role, because I'm fully remote, I can work literally from anywhere. I travel for my job as well. I'll be traveling domestically quite a bit, but also internationally. Currently, I'm sitting in Washington, D.C. on a short little work trip. That freedom and flexibility of space is something I always loved about being an entrepreneur. And so that having that back into my working world has been amazing. It also gives me that flexibility to maybe, possibly, perhaps bring back a little digital nomad life globally. We'll see. Stay tuned. But that work from anywhere component where I can go to the coffee shop and work. I can go work in the lobby of my building at home. I can obviously work from home. I can work from the couch, wherever. And that flexibility is really amazing, because I will say, and as we get into the cons, like that was one of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest negatives to the first role I took, where I had to commute in every day. I had to work in an office. I loved so much about that role and my boss and the work I was getting to do there, but that daily slog of commuting and working in an office was not the best for me. We'll talk more about that in a second. And so then the last thing I will say is that going back to 9 to 5 has actually bolstered my confidence. So it's bolstered my confidence in a couple of different ways. So the first way, my expertise, if you will, my experience, my skills. I think there was a while there where I was starting to think like, I haven't built a bazillion-dollar business, so maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe I'm actually no good at the things I teach about and talk about and I've tried to do. I've built, two multiple six-figure businesses. I built, Go Abroad to be a multiple $1-million business. I still was lacking in confidence, like, maybe I don't really know what I'm doing. Maybe I don't really have any savvy or innate skill in this arena. But the two areas that I have put myself out there is like, I might know little things about this, but it's like career development and online business growth or marketing, online marketing. Those areas are things that I thought I knew a lot about, but my confidence was starting to wane quite a bit. And after this last year of, landing these two different jobs in very different kinds of settings and mojos behind both of these organizations, I'm starting to feel like, all that stuff I've taught at my company Inside Study Abroad and my career development coaching programs and courses, I'm really proud of what I've taught and what I've taught inside those programs and I've done with coaching with people, because everything I've ever shared and everything I've ever told is stuff that I do for myself. And those strategies and tactics worked. I was able to land 2 very high-paying jobs, senior level jobs, in less than a year after being out of the job market for almost a decade. I had not applied for a single job in 10 years, basically. I was able to sort of still utilize that expertise and leverage it to land myself 2 distinct roles in less than a year. It makes me feel proud and like, hey, y'all, I kind of know what I'm talking about when it comes to growing your career development, landing that dream job. I am going to share more about that and different things I've done. I've seen other people do that, I've coached that's given them success. And so if you're into that kind of career development stuff, please make sure you subscribe, hit the like, follow, all the buttons, wherever you're watching this, listening to this. Make sure that you hit the right thing so that you can stay tuned for more of those episodes. And then the other area, like I mentioned, is business development marketing side too. And being in this role within the startup has really shown me that I'm learning so much from them, but I'm also considered a really valued perspective and person on those 2 teams who has a lot of valuable ideas and perspectives that I can bring to the table, experience that I can talk about and say, hey, this has worked for me, this hasn't worked for me. And running your own show and being your own CMO and being your own sales director and being your own everything for nearly a decade, it did teach me quite a bit, and I have a lot that I can share and add value to the team and our organization. Confidence is, I think, something that's really hard for me to talk about because I don't want anyone to think I'm overconfident and that I'm so full of myself and I think I'm, the best thing that's ever happened to the world. But at the same time, I'm like, what's wrong with me being confident and thinking, wow, I have actually something really lovely and valuable and justified to offer the world because I've got my receipts. I can bring some goodness to people who need advice and direction on whether it's growing a career or launching a business. Yeah, I don't know. Just feeling a little better, feeling a little confident about those things. All right, let's move on to the cons and talk about those. I'm going to try to rapid fire these because I don't want to dwell on the negative. Oh man, my battery's about to die. Hold on, please. Okay, I'm back. Let's dive into the cons of going back to a 9-to-5 job because, y'all, there are some. And not everything is roses and sunshine. Not every job is perfect. Not every organization is perfect. It's just, we all have to accept, too, that nothing is ever perfect. And that's also fine. Like, we roll with the things that don't necessarily bring us a lot of joy, and we revel in the things that do. And it's okay that not everything is perfect. And so if you're expecting any job or any business venture or vacation or anything you ever do to be completely perfect, y'all are going to be waiting a long time because it's never going to happen. Coffee break. Hold on. Okay. So the first one is, I mentioned before that the pro was this idea of community, the accountability, but that is also kind of a negative for me because I'm such a lone wolf, if you will. I love to work alone, work on projects by myself. Having to check in with someone and having to sort of get things approved or getting a sign off on something, didn't always love, especially at the college where there's a lot more bureaucracy and checks and balances, which is, you could argue, is good or bad, but there was just a lot more constraints around what I could do. And I think along with that, the idea of like physically having to be in an office in order to apparently be impactful really, really was the biggest drawback from the job at the college. Even after a few months, I already knew, like, I had no plans to leave. I had not, I wasn't applying for jobs or anything, but I was already thinking, like, how long can I actually do this? How long can I actually do the commuting and butt in seat existence of, having to basically clock in and clock out every day, even though we didn't technically have timesheets. I think another component to me is like, because I've worked alone and haven't ever had a really big team and always just had like contractors for the most part, I had employees at the first role, and I realized, wow, I really don't miss managing people. I really don't miss this component. I don't currently manage anyone now. Thank God. Who knows, that might come in. But I've managed big teams previously, and it just does not bring me joy. So I will say that was definitely a con, especially in the first role. The commuting, the managing people, working in an office, that was a huge negative. But even now, working remotely, as much as I'm like, oh, I don't want you in my stuff, at the same time, I'm also quite isolated because I work alone. And what I'm working on is very much only me. I am the only one managing partner marketing. I work directly with senior leadership, and I'm just doing other things in my own little world. And so it does get a little bit isolating. But that is, I think, unique to my role. I don't think that's always remote jobs. I think remote jobs are the bee's knees. I'm so glad it's like the norm now that everybody, almost a lot of knowledge workers, I will say, have the ability to work remotely. The next con, even though the last year, I'm very thankful that I've had just like the time to release and rest and regroup and all the things I talked about before. I'd also like, when you're working a 9-to-5 gig, 9-to-5 or a full-time gig, even if you're doing it remotely, it's still a drain on your energy, your time, your bandwidth. If you do have aspirations to do either side hustles or hobbies that take a lot of time and energy and bandwidth, you're just not gonna have that. You're gonna be mentally tired. You've intellectually exerted yourself throughout the day, and so then thinking about another couple of hours of doing other work is really hard. And so I feel for the people who've always told me like, oh, it's really hard to start a business on the side. I'm just like, yeah, it truly is. This year, my plan is to do more on the side of my own brand and business and do less consulting, because I've still been doing quite a bit of consulting over the last year. I have more bandwidth to put into my own brand and ideas and business. The next con is just a sort of bigger picture, thinking about employee versus entrepreneur or owner. If you are an employee, you are just always going to be capped financially. There's just no getting around it. The owner of the company or the founders of the company are always going to have exponential financial revenue, income from the business that they started. And so you as an employee, you're just always going to be capped. Even if you get raises, even if you have a bonus structure, all those things, those are wonderful. And I have both of those. But at the same time, I'm still always going to be capped. Somebody else is going to determine, well, this is where the limit is for you. And that sucks. The flip side to this argument, though, is when you work for yourself, yes, there is no cap, but there's also no basement. For me, there were months that I would go without making any money. And then I'd have a few months where I'd be making $25,000 a month, and it would ebb and flow in that direction. There are benefits to both, but there's also cons to both. You're thinking like, which is right for me? I always say like, get something going first. And my next episode is also going to be talking about my biggest lessons in business over the last decade and sort of my advice to my younger self if I were starting all over again. Sort of advice for you. I'm going to talk a little bit about this. How do you balance getting something off the ground while keeping the financial security of a full-time job? And we'll talk about that in the next episode. But yeah, I mean, that financial cap is real and something I think about a lot. While I'm never going to go below a certain number based on my salary, I'm never also going to go much higher than that unless I get promoted. And yeah, this financial cap. Next, there's that lack of time freedom. I do work a 40-hour-a-week job, and there is flexibility at my company, at least, because we work remote and we have unlimited PTO. So if I need to go to a doctor's appointment or take Barnaby to the vet, or a friend wants to do lunch, like I can do those things. It doesn't make or break my role or what I'm doing or the company. They're like, yeah, go do it. And also because there's lots of meetings in my current business, we do check in a lot over Zoom and Slack. It is constrained time-wise, and that is a big difference from my time as an entrepreneur when I could do whatever I wanted at any time of day or night, which is also kind of a challenge as well. So like I said, there's pros and cons to everything. And then finally, the biggest con of going back to a 9-to-5 job for me after nearly a decade of being an entrepreneur and working for myself was that it kind of took an emotional and psychological toll on my ego. And I talked a little bit about this in my last episode where I talked about going back to a 9-to-5. But, you know, for me, I've worked through this in therapy, been journaling a lot about it. And it is hard because I do think like, okay, if I'm in a 9-to-5 job, does that mean I failed as an entrepreneur? And there's lots of pros like I've talked about, and probably some I haven't even thought of to share with you. And there's lots of cons like I've just described. But at the end of the day, it was a big part of my identity being an entrepreneur, big part of my entire existence was basically growing those companies. And now that I have bandwidth to think about other things and to think about what I want my life to be in the future, and also think about how I've devoted my time in the past, I just said the benefits was confidence, but at the same time, the other side of that coin is it's also made me lack confidence. It's hit my ego in a lot of ways and made me question my ability to build a successful company. And honestly, that's the question or the thesis or the idea I'm planning to explore over the next year and beyond of what does it take to build something successful. I'm all about that work less, earn more mentality. And I want to see how little I can do to build a company on the side as a solopreneur, as a side hustler, and see how long that takes and what are the true components and mechanisms that need to be in place to make that a reality, and really dive into some of these more psychological, mental struggles that I think a lot of people have. I got a few comments from people on the episode when I released it back in February of 2022 talking about going back to a 9-to-5. And I think a lot of people resonated with this idea of being a little embarrassed, feeling like a failure, feeling like, maybe I just can't hack it as an entrepreneur. Yeah, it's a real thing and it's something I'm still grappling with. So we'll see. I did say in that last episode, when I get into that headspace, and maybe this is a good strategy for you if you also struggle with this, but when I get into that kind of negative self-talk rabbit hole, I will sit down and I will start journaling my accomplishments. I achieved this. I did this. I grew this amount of money. I launched this. I impacted this number of clients and students, etc. Like, I will write down a laundry list of the most grand and the most tiny accomplishments that I've achieved throughout my career or my businesses, to really give myself, it's like my own little pep talk. Nobody has to see it. Nobody has to know except me. It helps me get out of that negative spiral, especially when you have depression. It's so easy to find yourself in. If you are struggling with something like that, if you feel like you've taken a hit to the ego in some area of your life recently, I encourage you to give it a go. Sit down with a piece of paper and just start writing out things you've achieved, even the most tiny things. And I think you'll be surprised at how much you've done and you've accomplished in your life and your career. And I think it'll help you get out of that mindset and can go on the rest of your day and do something actually valuable with your time instead of beating yourself up. That's it. There you go. Those are the pros and cons, at least for me, of going from an entrepreneur to an employee over the last year that I've discovered. And I hope you'll stay on this journey with me as I explore and edge my way forward in what it looks like to build a personal brand or build a brand alongside a 9-to-5 job, which is something I've technically never done. Well, that's not true. Inside Study Abroad started as like a blog on the side, so I can't really say it wasn't a side hustle, but I had no vision for it making money, so that's slightly different. Moving forward is really focused on what it means to build a lucrative, revenue generating, profitable side hustle while you're working a 9-to-5. So we'll see how that goes. Thank you so much for listening and watching this episode. Again, if you liked it, please subscribe, hit the like button, leave a comment. Let me know what you're struggling with. If you've tried the journaling method that I just described, if you are also in that, like, should I go back to a 9-to-5? Or maybe you have gone back to a 9-to-5. What are some lessons or pros and cons you've uncovered from making that transition? Have a wonderful, wonderful week, y'all. And remember that every day you postpone a dream, you weaken it a little. So get out there and make some magic happen. Cheers.